Alright guys, so I was reading the Wikipedia of the Fritzl case the other day, and there's this incident described in it where, sorry I keep shaking the desk, where a UK journalist broke into the home, the like safe house that Fritzl's daughter and all of her children were living in, and broke into it and took a photo of the kitchen. Like years after they'd been through this thing, the worst thing that could ever happen to a human being, and they're trying to recover in privacy and peace, and someone, to get a pat on the back from their boss and a bonus, broke into their kitchen and took a picture when their entire life has been marred by a lack of dignity and peace and privacy and respect just for their humanity. And they have finally escaped and experienced such a huge but incredibly difficult change in their life. The level of it's just unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. It's disgusting, and I think people get kind of an easy ride for it. I don't think it's taken seriously enough. It's a grotesque invasion of someone else's privacy, and it's just so, from any perspective you look at it from, it's just so wrong. In any time or place, in any country, that's just wrong, And so much of it has happened. Piers Morgan obviously was responsible for a lot of phone hacking. I was mistakenly under the impression recently that he was responsible for the Millie Dowler phone hacking. He wasn't actually the editor at that time. A lot of phone hacking did happen on his watch, and had he done something and said something about it sooner, as the same with all of these people who were privy to it, then perhaps it never would have happened to Millie Dowler. But basically, for those who don't know, she was a schoolgirl who was viciously murdered, and I can't remember which paper it was, I think it was News of the World, they were hacking her voicemail. To be fair, I mean, hacking is like quite strong of a word to describe like what these journalists would do, because it's very easy to access people's voicemails. Easy when you don't have the requisite moral boundaries, and when you're encouraged to do it by your bosses. And they were listening to her voicemails, this girl who was missing, and at the time I think they didn't know what had happened to her, and they were given false hope because there was activity. The activity in some way showed up on the voicemail, either because they deleted messages to make room for new ones. I believe that's what it was full, so they deleted messages, and the parents took this to mean that she might be alive and that she was deleting the messages. How can you, I mean, it's just like how something like that doesn't land you a serious prison sentence, but like low-level drug dealing and stuff can. And I know, like, to be fair, like these days, I think like a lot of people don't go to prison for dealing if it's low-level. Prisons are pretty full, certainly in the UK. But it definitely happens a lot, like it's still, it might be less than it was, but it still happens a hell of a lot. And people do things like that again. I know it's like kind of redundant to like just grab two completely random things and compare them and say, if this, what about this? But I do think it speaks to a general standard of like, I think people have too much tolerance for stuff like that. Basically, in those two specific instances, it's not comparable to the initial crime itself that the whole story was about, because those are two particularly horrible crimes. But a lot of the time, that level of insensitivity from the press or whoever regarding things like that level of harassment of somebody's invasion of someone's personal space, like a missing child's voicemail, and meddling with things that are not that's it's I don't know, it's an incredibly ugly crime, incredibly ugly, and there's been so much of it. It's crazy. It's I don't know why it's particularly bad in the UK, but it's frightening. They're really terrible, absolutely terrible. There was another one. I mean, this is not really in the same category, but Tulisa, the singer from n-dubz, she got in a lot of trouble because a journalist from The Sun posed as some wealthy guy or something who was friends with these Arab sheiks, and he said to Tulisa, like, they really want some coke, and like, do you know, I don't know anyone who knows about stuff like this, they want like quite a big bit of coke. And she facilitated it, and he filmed the whole thing. I don't remember exactly what kind of trouble she got into over it. I know she was in court. I don't know if she was actually in court over this specifically. I think she was, although I don't understand, because it's like, I know he's not the law, but it's like entrapment, and the fact that he's not the law almost should make that taken into consideration even more. Like, he's not even a policeman, and he's like manufacturing fake crimes that don't exist to get someone in trouble, to prove the point. What's the point you're proving? Like, do you really think that by facilitating these guys buying coke, like, she's supposed to think, oh no, like, what I'm doing is wrong? Like I don't know, how can like grown-up people pretend that what she did was anything other than like a bit stupid given her elevated position in the public eye? Like, that's all it was. It's not morally wrong what she did. It's like, come on, like what she's going to be like, what if one of them hurts themselves with it? What if one of them, it's like, they're grown men, they're like very wealthy, clearly in control of what they're doing, and it's quite a normal thing for people to do, and it's not a big deal that she would be like, all right, like, oh, and the guy convinced her she wanted to do movies, and the guy gave the impression that he worked in the movie business and he was going to get her movie deals. And it's like, just, be realistic about that situation. Anyone who's being a fucking grown-up, who hasn't completely sensationalized the idea of cocaine in their head to a point where it's like, like the worst substance ever created or something, then it's just ridiculous to try and pretend that like she really deserved to be punished for that, and that it's worth making up a fake crime. It's crazy. It's just so grubby. And yeah, the name of this journalist who broke into the Fritzl, not the Fritzl home, Elizabeth Fritzl's home that she was in with her children, is not, I couldn't find the person's name. It's not made public. I would imagine they still work today. You can be fairly sure of that. Unreal. They're what they went through when you read about it. It's just unbelievable. And the process of recovering from it. There's very sparse information about it, but it's basically like there were some children who weren't there, and some children who were there in the basement, and that created a big divide, obviously, and meant that some of those children were like incredibly different to the other ones. And naturally, the ones who were down there developed like panic disorders to the point where like anything that like little tiny things, just like lights being turned on and off, was like a nightmare for them. And it's unbelievable that we're capable of that as a species, like capable of doing stuff like that to each other. It's unreal. And for all of the good stuff we can do, it's hard to measure it against that and say it makes it worth it, because stuff like that happens to people is so bad that it's not really, doesn't feel like it's worth any amount of good that we can create or are capable of elsewhere. It's not worth it. There are plenty of species that exist without that being possible, you know, like it's like decades they were down there, decades. And I mean, yeah, it's just yeah. One of the children, the reason she got out was because one of the children, if I remember correctly, died before, because Joseph, the guy who did it, wouldn't take the kid to the hospital because he didn't want to be, like, you know, found out or something. He delayed medical treatment. If I might have it wrong, I'm pretty sure that kid died. And she insisted this time, like when another one of them got ill, she insisted, like, you have to take this one to hospital. And he, for some, I think he at this point panicked and freaked out or whatever. Basically, like, he did ultimately in that situation the right thing, which is crazy that a guy who did those things, like on one or two occasions, he made the correct choice, actually, seemingly for the right reasons, you know, which is just a crazy thought, really. It's crazy. And he then brought them all upstairs, and his wife came home, and he was like, they've returned, you know. It's just fucking but yeah, he's up for parole in a few years. Obviously he won't get it. I mean, if he does, that, I mean, yeah, you can't accept that. You just can't accept that. It wouldn't be accepted. It just wouldn't be. He surely can never, ever, ever get out. The crazy thing is, he was he raped a woman at knife point when he was younger. But he later, when he first was found out for what he did to his family, he said that it started because of her discipline problems, and it was like he just had he grew up during the war and he had very strict ideas of right and wrong, or he grew up during the Depression or something, and he had, you know, his standards were different and she couldn't adhere to them. And then in the end, he all of the sick shit came out, and he was like, I was born to rape and stuff. And he had raped women before and been prosecuted for it, but after 10 years it had been wiped from his record. So when it came to adopting these younger children that he was bringing upstairs and saying had arrived outside the house, when it came to adopting them, none of this information about him raping women at knife point came up. When it came to him adopting children, so yeah, fucking crazy. He's up for parole in 3 years. And it was making me think about Charles Bronson, because he's coming up for parole again very soon, and I think it's going to be filmed. I think he's requested that it's filmed. I think it's the first parole hearing that's going to be filmed in the UK. And I hope it does get filmed, and I hope he does get released. I used to kind of be of a different mind, because a lot of people would say, oh, you know, he's only in there for like stealing £7 or something, and it's ridiculous, he should be let out. To be fair, for a lot of that time, he was still actively doing a lot of stuff that meant you couldn't really easily let him out, because he used to assault people a lot. And imagine you let him out and he fucking assaults someone and they die, and that person is like, why the fuck did you let this guy out when he was doing assaults in prison, taking hostages, kicking off, you know, like it's a difficult one. But you can also see as well that arguably being locked up in a cage all the time has made him a lot more violent and aggressive. It's hard to say. I'm sure in his younger days, if he was out in the streets, like, he definitely would have done stuff, you know. He definitely would have had to just keep going back in. That's the thing. But now, like, he seems very unlikely to do it to me. And yeah, there is that element of like public safety. You have a debt to the public to kind of like not have people out on the streets that are potentially like really dangerous, but there's a limit with that, you know. If someone punches someone in the face once, there's a reason you don't lock them up for 30 years, you know. There has to be a bit of like give as well, you know, and it's been quite a while since he's done anything, and he's old, and he seems like a really nice guy, like a guy who has a lot to offer, like, obviously, outside of just being a prisoner. And the thought of him being on podcasts and stuff is just unreal. Like, I think it would be crazy. I think it would be absolutely, like, even just the phone calls and stuff they play with him. There's one on the James English podcast where his son phones him, and he's just pure charisma from start to finish. Like, he's so funny and so interesting, and just a character. He's just really, really unique. So I think it would be amazing if he got released. Obviously, you know, would hope it would be like incident free for everyone's sake. But surely it's time now for him to be released. And I think most of the public have been wanting it for a while. But man, it'd be crazy. He could make a fortune, I think. I think if he gets out, hopefully he gets out at this age while he still has a lot of life to live. He doesn't get sucked into any bad shit or bad influences or whatever else, and is just able to enjoy the fact that when he gets out, he can be fucking minted. Like, all UK TV news stations would pay to have him on. Any podcast would pay to have him on. Documentaries, fucking movies, like books, whatever. Like, he could make bank. He could make millions, I think, like almost immediately. A full feature-length documentary about him, with him talking and with, like, you know, memories from also. That would be the best shit ever. I think he's certainly, if you're talking about recent years, maybe we don't really know because we've barely had any chance to actually experience him, but maybe he's not, it doesn't get as deep about Mike as Mike Tyson does about like some of the stuff he does now. But to be fair, that's kind of like a recent thing for Mike Tyson. But I think he's very similarly interesting and charismatic, like on the same sort of level. And it's just cool to have people like that around, really. And all the true crime podcasts, obviously, he could be on all of those. But I guess in a way, he wouldn't even really need to do true crime podcasts because he's kind of like general interest to the world in general. Yeah. Sound. All right. That's all really. Anyway. Latest chaps.